Okay, I should be live, but if for some reason I'm not, let me know because I don't want to waste your time or mine, I guess. But hey, welcome back to another Monday where we're going to discuss current events that are relevant to preparedness, which is something we do here every week in case you're new. And hopefully you are because we're trying to get some more of this message out, right? And we have a lot to go over tonight when it comes to these coordinated attacks in France, when it comes to how you should expect some of these similar situations to arise here in the US, and the expansion of the war in the Middle East, which only seems to be getting worse. So these are all things that we have to pay attention to in order to be better prepared. Now, I do have the 5x5s coming in. We've got 5x5s coming in from Grisio Nemo, Big Country, Harbor Prepper, Darren Lear, and we have Sarah Rice saying, hello, Berkshires, Massachusetts. Welcome. And Dave Sickles, good evening to you as well. Oath Taker 276 is here, ready to go. And we have some good info to go over. And while everyone's still getting into the chat tonight, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can have live streams like this one, give you good information, and test out gear and equipment relevant to preparedness. So big thanks to Midway USA. Check out their one-day only deals they've been doing lately. They're actually pretty insane sometimes. So make sure you're taking a look at that. And then, of course, the live streams themselves are specifically sponsored by magicprepperbeef.com, which is where you can get shelf-stable, long-term survival beef that is freeze-dried. It'll last 10 years minimum, most likely much longer. And you get sous vide, filet mignon, New York strip, ribeye. It's good to go. It means you'll have steak in the apocalypse, but it is expensive. So if you are interested in this and you want to supplement your pantry with high-quality American beef that's ready to rock, make sure you check this out and use the code MAGICPREPPER to get 15% off of your order. That's magicprepperbeef.com. I will put a link in the description as well as in the live chat right now. And now I think we can get things going because everybody is, well, hopefully here, right? So listen, there's a lot to talk about. And I think we all know there's a lot of strange things going on in the world right now, especially in the realm of good versus evil, let's just say, right? I think we should at least maintain the standard that there is such a thing as good and evil. And hopefully we're all on the side of good because, well, we just want to be prepared so we can maintain our lives and take care of our families and hopefully better our communities in the process, right? So to me, that's good. And I think that we're doing the right thing by doing so, but there's a lot working against us lately. Now, recently I put out a video about how all eyes should be on France. And it was in regards to their election situation and how there was unrest in the streets and everything else regarding the elections, even though the ones who they wanted to win did, right? The same people who supported that side still decided that unrest was necessary, which is why I said we should take a look at it. Now, some of the other things occurring in France are also, in my opinion, in many ways, a crystal ball into the future of the USA. And so a big part of why we're talking about how we're next when it comes to some of these activities, because I think there's a lot of evidence as to why. And I think that you should be planning on some of these disruptions to occur for you here in the near future. And the one big thing, protect and preserve, howdy to you as well. The one big thing I want you to take away from this is that we are the next big event when it comes to the world stage, right? So right now we have the Olympics, which is a worldwide event, which lots of people are watching, or at least they have the attention of many nations, right? The next big thing is the American elections, right? The US elections of 2024, the presidential election, is the next big world event that's occurring, which lots of people will have eyes on, which means that's an opportunity to make some noise, right? So with that idea in mind, let's talk about what's happening in France and why we should expect to see it here next. And even an example of something that just happened here, which could be somewhat related, at least in regards to this very simplistic style of fifth generation warfare, right? Where things are very rudimentary. We don't need fancy tech. We don't need cyber attacks. We don't need drones or anything like that. Some of this stuff is literally just some weirdo with a pair of bolt cutters, right? So, and no, that's not me because I am a weirdo and I do have bolt cutters, but this is a different story. Saboteurs cut internet cables in latest disruption during Paris Olympics, okay? So this is additional sabotage that's happening there right now. Of course, we had other forms of sabotage that we're going to discuss tonight as well, but this is stuff that can easily occur anywhere. So it doesn't matter if you're in the US, if you're in Canada, if you're in, Switzerland or in Australia, wherever you're checking in from, right? The UK, this can happen anywhere. So this is why you should be paying attention, okay? And this is from July 29th, which I'm pretty sure is today. Unless you're here on replay, crew, which means it's not today, but you should still check in because I appreciate you and you guys are awesome. Long-distance internet cables in France have been cut in an act of sabotage, causing disruption to internet services across the country. This is the second disruption during the Olympic Games in Paris after high-speed train lines were targeted in a series of arson attacks hours before the Games kicked off. We're going to talk about those as well, but let's keep moving forward here. Marina Ferrari, France's junior minister for digital affairs, said on X that in the early hours of Monday morning, multiple locations around France were affected by several damages that impacted telecommunications providers and have resulted in localized consequences to fiber optic services as well as mobile internet activity. Internet companies confirmed the damage. Okay, so this is happening. Now, there were some unconfirmed reports of a power outage or a blackout in Paris as well. I can't verify those claims. It seems like there's only a small amount of posts about it on social media, and there hasn't been any other coverage from like any type of journalistic source, let's just say. But I'm also not past the idea at this point in time in our current situation that the media would just ignore something in order to avoid a panic or in order to avoid making anybody look incompetent, right? So who knows? But that was something that was reported. I just wanted to throw that out there. We're not covering that tonight because I don't have any verifiable information about it. And it's possible that it never even occurred. So, but just be aware that there were people who claimed that it certainly did. Okay, at the time of writing, nobody has claimed responsibility for either attack. This is an interesting part of it because we're not getting those claims you'd usually expect from some of these terror organizations, right? Officials have yet to identify any suspects involved in cable cutting sabotage, but they believe the disruption of train services could have been committed by people with ultra-left political leanings. And we actually have evidence of that we're going to discuss here very soon, where somebody was apprehended that had ultra-left political leanings, okay? The incidents around the Olympics come at a time when Russia has been blamed for a string of disinformation targeting France and has also been linked to a series of potential sabotage attacks in Europe. So we're back to where it's always Russia, right? Which there is a possibility of that. I'm not trying to say there isn't, but it does seem like a very, let's just say, easy scapegoat to place blame on, right? Especially at this point in time, if you're in Europe, anything bad happens, might as well blame Russia because they're the bad guy right now. And who's really going to be able to argue it or prove you wrong, right? So like, just be aware of that. I feel like it's the easy explanation, especially from the authorities at this point in time. The second largest French telecoms company, SFR, appeared to be one of the most impacted by the vandalism. Our long-distance fiber network was sabotaged between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. last night in 5 different locations, a spokesperson from SFR told Wired. SFR says its maintenance teams are working on repairing the damage and said the impact on its customers was limited. Also, between 3 and 8 other operators are impacted since they use our long-distance network, the spokesperson said. Now, this just goes to remind you of how vulnerable these systems are and how easily affected these fiber optic systems are when it comes to very elementary sabotage. Like, we're literally talking about people opening panels and cutting wires. Like, that's how simplistic this is, which is why it's almost impossible to protect from, especially if you go on to these more rural environments where there's these networking hubs that are much less secure than in major urban areas, right? So this is something that just happened. Now, here's something I want you to really consider, okay? And I want you to listen to this part with a little bit more intent because I find it to be very interesting. Arthur P. Loudrain, a postdoctoral research associate in cyber diplomacy at King's College London, says the most recent incident seems less serious than the 2022 outages. Such actions are within the capabilities of ultra-left or ecologist and anarchist groups, especially if they benefited from insider assistance or knowledge, current or former rail or network workers, Loudrain says. However, we cannot rule out the fact that a state actor is encouraging, supporting, or directing such domestic groups to create plausible deniability of their involvement. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that. And there's a fly that is just trying to distract me tonight. So if you see me do anything absurd, that's probably why. One more time. We cannot rule out the fact that a state actor is encouraging, supporting, or directing such domestic groups to create plausible deniability of their involvement. I think that's very applicable to what's happening in the United States on a regular basis. But I also think it's interesting that we're mentioning ultra-left, ecologist, or anarchist groups. And of course, we recently discussed on a live stream here, just like I said recently, that some of these anarchist groups are actually getting training regarding firearms and first aid and everything else related to combatives in order to be prepared to act however they feel necessary if things don't line up with their ideology here in the near future. So be aware that this is not just isolated to the US or to France. This is the West, right? This is Western society experiencing these things. And some might argue that it's somewhat self-induced in many ways, right? Especially based on some of the recent events that we've all witnessed here when it comes to how we have strayed so far away from certain standards of morality, right? Like we're moving into a direction where this stuff is becoming more plausible and more reasonable because, well, people don't value each other anymore. Now, there's been more though, not just internet cables being cut. Okay, real quick, I want to jump in here. Rafael T. Novella says, 5x5, great to see you, buddy. Well, great to see you as well. And who doesn't like the name Rafael, right? Very solid. And in fact, that was the name of my first Sifu when I learned Southern Tiger Crane style Kung Fu. That really happened. Now, moving on. Stumbo Live, only one caliber for SHTF. That's a difficult one because it really depends on what type of SHTF we're talking about. But and I know I'm the weirdo when it comes to this, and people will hate on it all day long. But in reality, there's probably a good chance I'd be going with 9mm, mostly because I'll have it on my person, probably concealed, and it's what's going to actually be on me when I need it, versus just sitting in a vehicle or back at my house, right? So that's why my suggestion is a pistol before a rifle when it comes to those types of conversations. But regardless, now everyone can chime in about how wrong I am. So let's move on. What else happened? Why are we talking about counter scenarios here in France, right? All these coordinated attacks are happening at once. What kind of countermeasures are there, right? There are none. That's the thing that you need to be aware of, especially here in the United States. We are reactionary to these types of events. We are not proactive. And because of that, there's not going to be a scenario that is necessarily stopped from happening. All we have to hope for is that there's a way to get it fixed quicker, right? And that's well, they're finding out really quickly right now that that's not going well for them. Annie Oakley joined the membership. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. If you want to join, you can hit that join button down below. And if you do join, you can be part of the private live stream tonight, which will be on my community tab on my channel page. So if you're a member, you can check that out. And then you can jump in the private live stream, which is tonight at 9:15 Central Standard Time. And it's always right after the main live stream. So throwing that out there in case you're interested. Thanks, Annie Oakley. Much appreciated. French high-speed rail sabotage before Olympic ceremony. This is from 3 days ago, but in case you weren't aware, this happened, but there's been an update since then that you should be aware of. But first, I want to discuss this to give you some concepts about why this could happen here and why it's kind of insane how well coordinated these attacks are. This isn't just somebody who's mad about nature, right? Like, this isn't just some climate activist who likes to throw paint on a painting. Like, this is highly coordinated, okay? So, French rail company SNCF says at least 250,000 passengers are expected to be impacted by what the country's Prime Minister Gabriel Attal described as acts of sabotage on Friday. A series of fires caused the disruptions early in the morning local time, hours before the Paris Olympics opening ceremony. So we're talking about arson here. Like this is egregious in the sense of an attack. Like this is a malicious attack. Arson is a weapon, right? This is not just, a cyber attack or something without any kind of like victim, right? It's not a victimless crime. Like fire is dangerous and can definitely hurt people. A series of fires caused the disruptions early in the morning. Several high-speed TGV lines have been hit to the west, north, and east of the capital, and Eurostar has warned customers of longer journey times and cancellations. Several high-speed TGV, let's do that one again, I guess. Nobody has claimed responsibility, and Mr. Attal said that security forces were searching for those responsible. The public prosecutor's office is also investigating. Early this morning, acts of sabotage were carried out in a prepared and coordinated manner on SNCF installations, Mr. Attal wrote on social media. This fly is going to cause me some problems. SNCF earlier described the fires as a massive attack involving malicious acts. It said it was fixing the cables damaged in the attacks manually one by one. As many as 800,000 people could be affected over the weekend due to the disruption, the rail company SNCF warned. They're describing it as a massive attack, involving malicious acts, okay? And they were prepared and coordinated, which I agree with. And you'll see here just how spread out they were and how it all happened at almost the exact same time. And it should tell you how well organized whoever is behind this stuff really is. And all the information that's being put out is that it's people related to the ultra left, which I find very interesting because usually the media is very hesitant to place any blame on those groups. So I find this to be odd, maybe, but we'll discuss that here shortly because I think there might be some reasons behind why. Let's see here. I do want to check in real quick with everybody. Savage Lee, David Hicks, good to see you all. Darth Doodlebutt, get into choppa now. I can appreciate that. I'm always a good fan of that. So I am going to destroy this fly, but not tonight, apparently. Listen, this is something that could happen here very easily, but this is what you should really be looking at. This is the map of the attacks, okay? And all the information about it is that it basically happens simultaneously. This is not like in a small area. This is not a localized event. Like these attacks on this rail system were all over the country. And the way the media reported it is that it's almost as if, it was outside of Paris. Well, clearly it was outside of Paris to a certain degree, you might say, right? But this is more than just someone who's mad about the environment, right? These are coordinated attacks with a purpose, and they were successful, except for this one here that was foiled. 3 out of 4, though, right? So let's see here. One security source suggested in French media that the arson attack bore all the hallmarks of the extreme left. They keep putting that out there. I find that really interesting. I honestly do. But let's keep that in mind as we try to contextualize this information with the idea of it happening here in the U.S., right? So just remember that as we move forward. In one country, things are different than another, apparently, when it comes to reporting. Okay? Let's see here. The suspected sabotage comes after a Russian man was arrested earlier this week on suspicion of involvement in a destabilization plot targeting the games. Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin said he was suspected of spying on behalf of Russia's intelligence services. No Russian link has been made by French authorities to the sabotage on the rail networks. Russia is banned from the Olympics, although a number of the country's athletes are competing as neutrals. So yes, Russia's banned. Maybe they have a reason to create a stir, right? And to be upset about the concept. But I just find them to be they're just the most obvious boogeyman here, right? They're convenient. It's very convenient to blame everything on Russia. So this is what just happened. This is a big attack. This is not something that's like local. Now, consider a similar thing happening in the U.S. And we've seen railways attacked here in the U.S. multiple times, right? But not to the degree of coordinated efforts that disrupt large regions of rail. And maybe we'll be looking more towards that here in the near future based on what we're seeing happening in France. Because a lot of these operations tend to be training in some ways, right? Tend to be test runs. You never know. But they try to do more. And what do I mean by that? Well, they arrested someone trying to do more. Man arrested over suspected French railway vandalism. This story is from 12 hours ago. The previous story was from 3 days ago. So this just happened. An ultra-left militant. There it is again. So they are convinced as to who's behind this. Now, maybe they're being honest about the reporting, which I feel like might be the case. But here's the thing. If this was happening in the U.S., I have very much doubt that they would be reporting it this way. I don't think that this is the type of labeling they would be using, even if it was true. So I find this interesting at the least, right? An ultra-left militant was arrested in northwest France on Sunday after being found behaving suspiciously near a railway site, according to police sources quoted by French media. Officers who searched the man's car found keys to technical premises, pliers, a set of universal keys, and literature linked to the ultra-left. There's no indication that the man has links with the people responsible for Friday's suspected coordinated arson attack on railway lines ahead of the opening ceremony for the Paris Olympic Games. I think we can all pretty assertively agree that this person was likely linked to those same people, because the previous story even said there's a good chance these people were related to the ultra left. This guy, who literally had evidence of being related to the ultra left, got caught. And now they're saying they can't really say there's an indication that they were connected, right? Sounds to me like they had already made that indication for us, but here we are. The acts of sabotage paralyzed high-speed TGV lines running to and from Paris and heavily disrupted travel in France. On Monday morning, France's Minister of the Interior, Gerard Darmanin, said the number of profiles of people who could have committed these very deliberate, very targeted acts of sabotage had been identified. Now, here's what I find very interesting. And this is what I honestly am concerned about here in the US right now. And I'm actually concerned about this on many levels. And we can apply this thought process to what just recently happened to former President Trump based on this information and kind of keep it in mind as we move forward. The more we see this type of stuff occur, the more you have to understand how much involvement there may have been from those within, right? So what do I mean? He added that the methods employed were traditional of the ultra-left. Once again, we're back to ultra-left. I mean, they are really hammering the ultra-left in this one. And said there was likely a political claim behind the sabotage. The question is whether they were manipulated or is it for their own account? Mr. Darmanin said, adding that investigators were making good progress and would find those responsible. Although he stopped short of saying the saboteurs had accomplices within France's national rail operator SNCF, Mr. Darmanin noted the locations of the arson attacks were extremely specific. It was obviously extremely well targeted. It wasn't done randomly, and it affected 3 major lines, he added. Mr. D'Artagnan also said that around 50 people were arrested ahead of the Olympics, who alongside others thought to number around 150 had wanted to carry out either sabotage or radical protests in Paris during the first events of the Olympic Games. Okay, now, here's the part that I think we need to be very aware of and that I think we all need to consider as things happen here in the U.S., right? And no matter where you are, if these types of things are occurring, you need to consider this, okay? They are straight up talking about collaborators right now. Like, this is all collaborators, okay? These arson attacks were extremely specific. It was obviously extremely well targeted. It wasn't done randomly, and it affected 3 major lines. They're implying, and for obvious reasons, in my opinion, that people who were involved in these attacks had inside information and had access and gave this information to those who were involved, whether or not it was what parts of the railway to attack, what parts were not secure, how to access these parts, how to destroy them most efficiently, right? Like, all this stuff is being implied that there was inside help. And I assume that that's probably true, especially these days, based on how divisive things have been over the last couple of decades, right? Specifically the previous decade. Things have been so divisive that there are new generations and new, let's just say, thought processes entering the workforce every day. And our workforce has been degraded, and competency is lower, and entry requirements are lower, and expectations are lower. And so the people who are getting hired into these positions maybe previously wouldn't have been qualified, or maybe just have a completely different mindset about how the way of the world would work, right? And now we have these saboteurs that are somehow connecting with those who have this inside information and access to these facilities, and maybe are part of some of the security forces, right? And so maybe some of these inside people are working for certain units of law enforcement, right? When it comes to, I don't know, the Secret Service or anything along those lines. And so just be aware that these things happening in France right now are not going to be isolated, and that any of the same things we're witnessing there can easily happen here. Cutting fiber optic cable lines, creating arson attacks at different railway hubs, and disrupting our systems of transportation or just logistics in general are very easy to do and physical, right? These are not requiring high IQ people. Like, you don't need some type of top level hacker to do this stuff at this point. It's bolt cutters and some pliers and maybe an axe or a sledgehammer, right? Like, this is where we're at right now. And as long as they have the right information from the right people who have that information, they can be very effective, which I think is what we're watching happening in France right now, which is why you need to be very aware of who the collaborators might be when it comes to where you work or where you operate in the sense of your daily routine, right? Like there are people who do not have your interests in mind. Got to drink my coffee before this fly ruins it all. Now, there's also evidence of this happening here in the US right now. Now, I can't verify if this person has ultra left links, right, or has any kind of extremist ideology, but I do find some of the, let's just call them red flags, relatively interesting. And I do think it also at least showcases how much damage can be done by a single person if they're given any incentive, right? So, Jackson says, North Dakota will accept you. We aren't as pretty, though, especially the east side. Well, I have to agree that North Dakota is not very pretty in many ways, but we are very low in population and there is no traffic. So I do like that part about it. Now, let's keep moving forward. What are we moving forward for? Well, because there's this giant fire happening right now called the Park Fire. And this is local in the sense of being in the U.S., right? So we've moved on from France now. We're talking about the U.S. This fly, man. I'm going to go ballistic after this live stream. California's Park Fire that's torched over 120,000 acres, ignited by ex-con who pushed burning car into gully, district attorney. Now, like I said, I don't have any proof that this person has any involvement with any other groups. This could be a deranged human. And in all honesty, if we're going to go with like the most logical thought process here, what's the motive here? This guy spent the last, I think, 20 years in prison. Maybe he just wanted to go back because in all honesty, he probably can't really do too well for himself out here in the wild anymore, thanks to the fact that he has, well, you know, the felonies that he has, and one of them including being the most terrible type of person there is. The type who it generally identifies with the P. So, but this is how much damage can be done by one single a-hole. A still raging wildfire that's already burned more than 120,000 acres in California, making it the state's largest of the year thus far, was started by an ex-con and registered sex offender who pushed a burning car into a park goalie, authorities said Thursday. The inferno, now known as the Park Fire, ignited when the 42-year-old suspect, Ronnie Dean Stout II, allegedly rolled the vehicle into a goalie in Bidwell Park near the city of Chico just before 3 p.m. Wednesday, according to Butte County District Attorney. The flaming car shot 60 feet down an embankment and burned into a crisp while spreading flames into the surrounding areas, eventually prompting mass evacuations in the nearby Butte and Tehama counties. Stout was then seen calmly leaving the scene of the fire by blending in with park goers fleeing the rapidly evolving fire, the DA said in a release. The blaze quickly grew in size thanks to wind gusts and was only 3% contained by Thursday evening. Arson investigators with CAL FIRE and the DA's office identified the suspect as Stout, who was sentenced to 20 years in state prison for a 2002 robbery conviction, and arrested him early Thursday morning. Stout of Chico was booked into Butte County Jail, where he's being held until his arraignment scheduled on Monday. He is facing arson charges and his 2 previous strike felony convictions, which he'll also be charged with under California law. The whole 3 strikes and you're out deal, right? Now, here's something we can just talk about being kind of pissed off about if you want for a second, because it annoys me. He was convicted of lewd and lascivious acts with a child under 14 in 2001 and robbery with a great bodily injury in 2002, according to the DA. So in 2001, he did something awful to a child. And in 2002, he was still able to go pull off a violent robbery. So hurting a child under 14 didn't get him put away and allowed him to go out and just do something else terrible thereafter. But, you know, robbing somebody and hurting them in the process, that sent him to prison for 20 years. I'm a little upset about that. I feel like it should be the other way around because, you know, I think hurting a child should be considered much worse than robbery. That's my opinion. So, first off, I hate the way our legal system works when it comes to that because the priority doesn't seem to make a lot of sense now, does it? And secondly, this person, like I said, could have just wanted to go back to jail for all I know, right? Like, what's the motive behind this? We don't know. But this just reminds you that the largest fire of the year so far that has destroyed lots of property and has, well, so far burned over 120,000 acres was caused by one person who drove a burning car into a gully. And that's it. It didn't take anything that was crazy planned or huge amounts of coordination or anything like that. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind is that somebody who has those types of charges on their record and has spent the majority of their life behind bars does not generally have a lot to look forward to. And these people are often targeted by those who would want to leverage their situation to do us harm and create chaos. And so I don't know that that's what happened here. And I'm not trying to say that that is what happened here. What I'm trying to say is that you should always be considering that when these things occur, because it's not usual for someone to drive a burning car into a gully, right? Like, just generally doesn't happen too often, especially to then just walk casually away from it and hopefully blend in with the crowd and make your way peacefully out towards the park exit, right? So just be aware that these are the people who are targeted for said things by those who would want to see these things occur in order to cause that disruption and that chaos. That's just something I try to think about when I look at these stories. And I just wanted to mention that because not only is it happening here in the US with this really massive fire that's been really bad for a lot of people and Americans, right? Which like we're watching out for each other here. But the other thing to keep in mind is that this person, did this by themselves and was able to create that much damage, which doesn't really usually add up to what you would think would be required for something of that scale. But this person's elementary style attack, in the sense of arson, has delivered the largest fire of the year so far. And so at the very minimum, you could at least understand that anyone who wanted to do something similar could easily do it. There's not much stopping them from pulling it off. And it does not require sophisticated technology overseas in order to hack into a system, right? Then hack into the forest to burn it down. This fly. Hello from Idaho, Stan Grenfell. Well, hello. We're glad you're here. Rich Kai likes beer. I like beer too, in moderation. We got to be moderate about these things, right? Savage Lee says, I love silver and guns. Well, there we are. So here we are. All right. Now, here's some things to think about. And I am skeptical. Why do you ask? Because just like Russia, convenient boogeymen are just that, very convenient. So with all that stuff happening in France, and with that example of what has happened here in the US and could easily happen anywhere else based on how simple that situation was that developed into such a massive fire, Israel is saying that Iran sabotaged the French rail network ahead of Paris Olympics. They know that apparently. Not anyone else does, but this is what they're saying. Now, I think Israel has, a vested interest of painting Iran into the bad guy who does all these things to everybody else in order to generate support for their eventual war with Iran, right? Or at the minimum, their support for their war with Iran's proxies, which is happening, which is expanding, which we're going to talk about. But we're going to go back home before we get into that. We're still going back to the U.S. Don't worry, I promise. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz says that the sabotage of France's rail infrastructure ahead of the Paris 2024 Olympics was influenced by Iran's axis of evil and radical Islam. On Friday, French train operator SNCF announced that high-speed networks suffered malicious acts, including arson attacks. Shortly thereafter, Israel's Katz attributed the attack to Iran, noting that he had previously warned French authorities about potential threats from Tehran targeting Israeli athletes in France. The free world must stop Iran now before it's too late, Katz wrote on X. Now, like I said, Israel definitely has a vested interest in painting Iran as poorly as possible. But what I will say is that we also know Iran is behind the funding and the organization of such movements like the Free Palestine protests that occurred on college campuses here in the US, right? So I don't necessarily put it past them to organize or influence, or at the bare minimum, put the idea out there for what these people could do, even if they're not directly linked, even if they're not based around, Islamic ideologies or things that Iran would usually leverage, right, to their advantage. If they can find some sort of eco-activist group or anarchist group who's willing to do something, they're going to leverage that if they can. But I'm not saying that that's what happened, because I do find it convenient that every time something bad happens now, Israel seems to have the information that no one else has that Iran was directly involved, right? So always be aware of that. You shouldn't just buy into everything just because it's sensible. If someone has something to gain from the information that's being put out there, like I said, regarding support for their proxy wars or whatever else it might be, you have to at least question the, I guess we'll just say, authenticity of the information, right? Now, to be fair, okay. Hello, Cherokee Survival. Good to see you. Harry says we won't hear from Biden anymore. I don't think so either. Okay, so my house is going to get burnt down tonight because of this fly. I'm just going to bring out the flamethrower here soon, and it's going to be really bad, but we won't do that live. Don't worry. Okay, we're going to go ahead, and this is strange. CNN reporting this. That another time that I question the authenticity of such information, but we're going to talk about it because this is going back to Iran being painted as being the bad guy once again, but in a different way. And so let's look at this for a second because I find it a little interesting as well. Iran using covert influence campaign to undermine Trump candidacy, U.S. intelligence says. I find that weird because CNN would generally not give the Trump campaign any kind of benefit, right? As if like they need anything additional working against them, right? According to CNN, like it's the worst case scenario for, another Trump presidency. So why would they give them this carrot, right? This piece of candy to say, here you go, here, we're going to let everyone know that you're actually under attack regarding your campaign and your candidacy from these foreign entities. And that's why I find it odd. Iran is using covert social media activity and related influence operations in an effort to undercut the candidacy of former President Donald Trump, a U.S. intelligence official said Monday in an updated assessment of threats to the November election. The U.S. intelligence community has observed Tehran working to influence the presidential election, probably because Iranian leaders want to avoid an outcome they perceive would increase tensions with the United States, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said in a statement. The recent Iranian influence activity has come in the form of covert social media accounts and related activity. I'm pretty sure that's the ones where it's like the half-naked women that comment on all my videos now saying how good of a job I do. I'm pretty sure that's Iran. Okay, so Iran's preference for a U.S. presidential candidate has not changed since 2020, the ODNI official said. In the 2020 election campaign, Iran carried out a multi-pronged covert influence campaign intended to undercut former President Trump's re-election prospects, according to a declassified U.S. intelligence report. So they're affecting the election. They're possibly behind some of these attacks in France. Who knows? But what I will say is that they will leverage whatever they can to hurt us. So don't be surprised if something that doesn't seem relevant to a terror network or something like that doesn't have some tie somewhere. And like I said, especially with, the P guy who burnt down 120,000 acres in California, like there's probably no ties there in all honesty. But it just shows you how easy someone like that could pull off such a large, massive, devastating attack if they were so inclined to do so. And especially if somebody with that type of background was influenced in a way or leveraged to a degree or offered something in the sense of, money or I don't know, some type of familial obligatory benefit, right? Maybe that person decides to do that, right? These are things you have to keep in mind as we move forward. But they're influencing the campaign. I don't doubt it. I find it strange that CNN put it out there as being like, a problem for the Trump campaign. So, like I said, authenticity of information is important at times based on previous biases. But the other thing to keep in mind is that there's a good chance that that's the truth. And what does that mean, right? I'm pretty sure foreign interference with our elections is supposed to be a pretty egregious crime. Like this is supposed to be a big deal, right? Like we're not supposed to allow that to happen, right? I don't know. It's almost like we want to make sure this whole Middle East war thing gets kicked into overdrive to be on schedule, right? But one of the things that the Trump campaigns on is immigration. And that's where a lot of these, let's just call it possible actors, seem to be spawning from. And there are some things happening right now here in the U.S. that you should be aware of based on that level of information and based on the level of threat that we're all currently existing in right now. And what it can do to your area, your town, or your neighborhood if left unchecked. And that's what's happening right now in Brooklyn, and something that I find interesting because the residents there are kind of getting a little bit fed up with it. Okay. Let's see here. Christian Winter says, bruh. I can feel you on that. Rich Key or Kai. I've got the Three Stooges on YouTube now. Well, that's good. I'm glad you have quality entertainment. Let's move forward. So, you know those giant migrant centers that are getting set up in our major urban areas? People are finally kind of catching on that maybe it's not the best idea. After deadly shootings, Clinton Hill residents urge end to mega shelters for migrants. Trash piles up on sidewalks near two mega shelters for migrants in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, which have drawn ire from neighbors. And this is a reminder of like what this will do to you if it's in your area. Like this is why you should be concerned about what's been happening over the last few years in our country. Fights have broken out on the sidewalk outside the shelters, which are located near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. A shelter resident was charged in June with a non-fatal stabbing nearby. Earlier this month, 2 residents tested positive for measles. And neighbors added another worry on Sunday when a spate of shootings left 2 migrants dead and another in critical condition. Police said the shootings could be related. The violence has escalated neighbors' long-standing concerns that the shelter complex, which houses nearly 4,000 migrants in a 2-block radius, is simply too big. At a protest a block away from one of the shelters on Tuesday, throngs of Capitol Hill residents urged the city to downsize the facilities, which NYPD Assistant Chief Scott Henderson described as the largest concentration of migrants outside of Randall's Island. Okay. We have to be heard. Enough is enough, said Renee Collymore, the Democratic liaison for the local state of Assembly district, who organized the protest as well as past local meetings on the shelters. It's not about anti-migrants. It's about our safety first. The protest follows months of public pleas from neighbors, including those during heated town halls, urging local elected officials to do something about the complex. This is what's happening, okay? And this is what will happen as long as this goes unchecked. And it's going to continually go unchecked. And the part that's going unchecked the most is the part that should concern you the most. And when I say that, what I'm referring to is the northern border. Nobody pays attention to it, but it keeps making its way back in the news every so often because things are getting worse there. And there is no resources available for the northern border because the southern border is so out of control. And it's almost like the bad guys know that, right? Like they almost like know where to go in order to not get caught. Not all of them know, but a lot of them seem to. Mexican cartels linked to migrant smuggling operations at U.S.-Canada border, RCMP. If I were to be a guessing man, I would assume that if something bad were to happen in the sense of like an attack here in the United States, that there'd be a good chance that it would have originated somewhere other than here and made its way into the country illegally over one of our borders at this point in time. And why is that? Because the odds are in that favor. When you have the numbers showing up the way that they are, you are just increasing the odds that something bad's going to happen from that particular population. What do I mean by that? Okay. Fox 5 New York's Stephanie Bertini and a photojournalist Lenny Torres traveled to Clinton County, New York to uncover what's behind the surge in illegal crossings at the U.S.-Canada border, where U.S. Border Patrol recorded nearly a 1,000% increase in encounters with migrants between 2021 and 2023. I'm going to show you these numbers here in a minute, and you're going to be a little bit concerned. I guarantee you that, okay? Along the way, they heard from locals, asylum seekers, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who confirmed to Fox 5 New York that human smugglers are selling the journey south to migrants. Okay. We all know who the smugglers are. Mexican cartels are involved. What? It's not the Mexican border. I know. They don't care. They're up there too. Why? Because there's a way to make money from it. Anywhere they can profit, they're going to be. It doesn't matter if it's Mexico or not. Please be aware of that. The cartels are highly involved in most of the terrible things that are happening in our country right now when it comes to human trafficking, when it comes to fentanyl, when it comes to working directly with the CCP to infiltrate us from within. All of that's happening thanks to the drug cartels. And why? Because they can make $1 from it. They don't care about you. They don't care about humanity. They don't care about life. They only care about making money. Okay. This area is particularly active because migrants will fly first to the Canadian metropolitan hubs like Montreal and Ottawa. From there, they will embark on a smuggling run to the border, lined with farms and small towns, and told to walk across. They've been told how to cross. Most of them, when we intercept them, obviously they're scared. And when we ask them, they will often say that they've spent hundreds and thousands of dollars per person to cross, Poirier said. Crime rings typically charge between $3,000 and $6,000 per person and run 3 to 7 people at a time, according to the CBC. These people didn't magically show up in Montreal and come across the border on their own. We assume there's networks out there that are helping them, Major Nicholas Leon, a chief deputy with the Clinton County Sheriff's Office, told Bertini. The Border Patrol is flat out understaffed on the northern border. They have long stretches of border that they just don't have enough people to cover. This is very true. Now, what about the numbers? Check this out, okay? Whew. In 2021, 916 individuals were apprehended at the U.S.-Canada border. In 2024, 16,459 were apprehended at the border. And the resources have not increased. We don't have a huge Border Patrol presence or additional resources being sent there either. That's just how many more people are crossing the northern border right now. 16,459 compared to 3 years ago with 916. That's huge. And in case you didn't know, I've gone over this many times, but you might be new here, which is good. I appreciate you being here. The northern border accounts for the most KSTs being encountered during illegal immigration. And a KST is a known or suspected terrorist. The northern border encounters more of them than we do at the southern border. So be aware of that because it's a problem. Now, deadly throat punch. Many of those cartel members feel we took half their country and resources from them. They don't feel bad for us in the U.S. Yeah, they might feel that way, but that's just not how it is anymore. So I'm not going to justify anything they do, right? I don't care what they think or how they justify any of their actions. They're our enemy. They're killing America. I don't know how else to say that. So they can kick rocks for all I care. So good night, Rhonda Pagan. Glad you were here. Let's keep moving. JD, damn. Law of the minimum, you did make it. Yeah, it is a huge increase. It's not like a small amount. It's not from 900 to 1,800. 900 to 16,000 is a kind of a big deal, right? Now, in case you didn't know, speaking of cartels, recently one of their leaders was apprehended in the U.S. Americans urged to be cautious in Mexico after arrest of El Mayo. Okay, El Mayo is a drug cartel boss, and he was arrested. And the gist of this story is that you should expect there to be violent crime in border towns at any moment right now. Okay, this is when there's a power vacuum, so that suddenly there's land grabs, there's gang violence, there's turf wars, all of this stuff happens. But this can happen in the United States just as much as in Mexico. And they're not warning the U.S., they're warning people in Mexico that are from the U.S. But don't think that just because you're in the U.S., but you're in a border town, that you're safe from this type of activity. This can spill over very easily. And not to mention, this is also something that can happen here in the U.S. just based on politics, right? A crime lord isn't much different than a politician now are they? Right? we got to be honest with ourselves here. And they both have their own factions, right? And they generally try to claim turf when it comes to districts and such. So just be aware that this is maybe just Mexico is just, future us. I don't know. I hope not. The Mexican border state of Chihuahua is preparing for a worst-case scenario due to the arrest of 2 top Sinaloa drug cartel leaders in the United States last week. Chihuahua Governor Maru Campos told us to prepare for the worst of scenarios in case of a spike in violence from these detentions. Public Safety Director Gilbert Loya said during an online news conference Monday. Why prepare? Because it's not clear what happened. There could be a different response from criminal groups if it was a surrender or a betrayal between cells of the same cartel. Simultaneously, a Virginia-based private security firm urged Americans commuting to work or traveling in Mexico in the next few days to monitor trusted sources to avoid getting caught up in unexpected street violence. The group is urging caution, though not recommending canceling vacations or business trips to Mexico yet. Great. Let's not cancel those trips, although there could be a cartel blood war on the street at any moment. Make sure you go visit Cancun. It's going to be beautiful this time of year, I promise. Hopefully you understand. That was sarcasm. I wouldn't go to Mexico now at all. That's just how I feel. This is why I got an MCK conversion kit for my G19. It's a truck force multiplier. There you go. Well, and you can't have a rifle in the vehicle. Well, you got your workaround. Good job for you. And it's always good to have a little truck buddy, right? All right. So, Robert P., as long as the regime protects them and prosecutes Americans, yes, we are in trouble. I completely agree with you. Rip Curl Readiness, they are very similar. Exactly. And you know what? I appreciate you being here, Rip Curl, and being a mod. As always, very cool. And I hope you guys know Rip Curl is an awesome member of this community. So, speaking of the border, wait, why are we still talking about that? Because the stuff is happening, man. I don't know what to tell you. By the way, Palestinians with terror ties detained after illegally crossing southern border. Agents are overwhelmed. Report. This is from yesterday, July 28th. This is like, it just keeps happening. And like I said, the statistics, the odds, the probability of something bad happening from someone who entered this country from one of our unsecured borders is becoming higher every single day. The numbers are against us at this point. We are lucky that we're just hanging out right now. Like, we're lucky that there hasn't been something larger. But based on what's happening in France right now, cables are being cut, right? Internet's going down. We have railways being attacked, and arson being used as a weapon against rail stations and shutting down transit. I mean, these are very rudimentary attacks being pulled off by who knows who, supposedly ultra-left whoever's, right? But anyone can do these things. And there are thousands of candidates in the country right now who likely have ties to some of these organizations. And we're going to talk about them right now. 3 Palestinian migrants who crossed into the United States illegally through the southern border were detained after they were found to have terrorist ties, according to media reports. Federal law enforcement sources told the New York Post that one of the migrants had salacious photos on their phone, including an image of a masked man holding an AK-47 rifle. Oh, man. Anyway, I was going to make a joke, but I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. In addition to the Palestinians, one migrant from Turkey is suspected of having ties to terror groups. It's unclear which terrorist organization the migrants were allegedly affiliated with. So unclear. What terrorist organization could Palestinians possibly be affiliated with? I have no idea. Very unclear, though. Fox News Digital has reached out to border authorities. The migrants were among a larger group who turned themselves into border agents at the San Diego sector. They were taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force was investigating their cases. Border agents at the San Diego sector have been overwhelmed, but don't have access to criminal databases in other countries to properly vet migrants, said one unidentified agent who spoke to the outlet on the condition of anonymity. Listen to what this person said. It's really sad, in all honesty, because I honestly believe this person wants to do what they can to protect our country and is one of the good ones we have, in law enforcement, and just knows that they can't. And that's really depressing, because what does that do for morale, right? Knowing who these guys are, we have no access to anything international. We really don't. And it kind of sucks, the agent said. I wanted to get into Border Patrol and protect from terrorists. And it's well, I probably let terrorists in the country. That's someone in Border Patrol saying this. That's how they feel right now. And we wonder why we can't get enough people to work these jobs, right? Border agents in San Diego have been warned to keep a lookout for people possibly tied to Palestinian terror groups following the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. San Diego Field Office Intelligence Unit assesses that individuals inspired by or reacting to the current Israel-Hamas conflict may attempt travel to or from the area of hostilities in the Middle East via circuitous transit across the southwest border, a previous alert stated. Foreign fighters motivated by ideology or mercenary soldiers of fortune may attempt to obfuscate travel to or from the U.S. to or from countries in the Middle East through Mexico, the memo added. Okay, now, 3 Palestinians with terror ties, they were detained. How many were not, right? This is the southern border. It keeps happening. It's going to keep happening. And every single day, more are coming in. You have to be prepared. We need to be prepared for, grid down scenarios. We need to be prepared for the internet to go down. We need to be prepared for transit to be stopped, right? Everything we're seeing in France right now, you should very much so be prepared for. These are basics, right? The internet's fragile. Transit is fragile. All these things are fragile. We know that, okay? But at the same time, these people are also dangerous, right? And they don't always just cut intercommunication lines. Sometimes They do bad things that hurt people directly. And so you should be prepared for that also. And I know that's harder to consider, right? Like I can deal with a blackout pretty easily, just stay at home and run my generators the way I see fit to be efficient, and then just use whatever I feel I need in the sense of power consumption. Great. There's not much of a threat there other than just not having power, right? But these people are coming in with intent to harm. And at that point, you need to do a little bit more than just be able to turn your lights back on, right? You need to be able to do a little bit more than just be able to eat 3 meals a day continually for however many weeks you need to before venturing out, right? Like these are the things to consider. And unfortunately, that's just where we are right now. It's very saddening, but it's the truth, okay? Okay. This fly. Let's see here. Had a super chat come in. Crazy California Fishing. Hey, Magic, I just started my own business selling custom MREs. Can I get a shout out? Well, you know what? Don't do advertisements in this fashion. I appreciate the enthusiasm, though, and I appreciate the entrepreneurship. So obviously, I think people know how to get a hold of you now and how to look at that for you. But I also can't succumb to that because then I'll have every business that operates a Temu account right now on my live streams every single day, doing super chats, trying to get shout outs, right? So I appreciate it and I get it. But just be aware that I can't sustain that and I can't do it for everyone. So I can't do it at all in a way, right? So I hope you understand. I'm not trying to be rude. But I appreciate it. I do appreciate the support of the channel. And I do appreciate someone who's trying to put together MREs and helping people out. So if that's something you're into, make sure you check out what they're doing over there. All right. Now, we also have to talk about this war in the Middle East and how it's expanding. First off, Erdogan is saying he's going to invade Israel. Now, it's a little hyperbolic, right? But look, man, when you're talking about NATO, please be aware that NATO is including Turkey, but Turkey is not always including NATO. And, people are like, those radios and those optics and those flashlights and all that stuff, it's going to fail you when China invades because they're going to pull the switch and then everything's going to shut off, right? Well, don't forget that Turkey made all those really terrible shotguns you guys bought. So just be aware of that, okay? I don't know why they made you a shotgun that only lasts 50 to 100 rounds, but I have a feeling it could be because they might not be our friend one day. All right, so I got to throw some shotgun shade at them. What do you want from me? Turkey's leader on Sunday threatened military intervention in Israel to stop Jerusalem's war in Gaza, a significant escalation of rhetoric from NATO's second largest military. In a meeting with his Justice Development Party, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey must be very strong so that Israel can't do these ridiculous things to Palestine. Just like we entered Karabakh, just like we entered Libya, we might do similar to them, he said, according to a Reuters report. And Crazy California Fishing, thanks. I appreciate the understanding there. Like I said, I was not trying to be rude. I just have to be honest and reasonable about expectations, I guess, right? So Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz came back swinging, suggested Erdogan would meet a similarly deadly fate as Iraq's former president, Saddam Hussein, who was executed by hanging in 2006. Erdogan follows in the footsteps of Saddam Hussein and threatens to attack Israel. Just let him remember what happened there and how it ended, Katz said in a message posted to X that included a picture of Erdogan and the former Iraqi leader. So that's not good, right? This thing is spiraling out of control very quickly. And just to kind of show you that that's not just related to political figures speaking their piece or trying to get their 15 minutes in, but we just had a big attack in Israel, a rocket attack from Hezbollah that killed 12 people who were between the ages of 10 and 20. And it happened on a soccer field, or according to the rest of the world, a football field. But if I say that here, no one's going to imagine them playing soccer, right? So bear with me, anyone not from the U.S., but we're sticking with soccer, I guess. Israel's security cabinet approves military response to rocket attack from Lebanon. This is from 6 hours ago. They're going to retaliate from this attack, which means this quid pro quo and this exchange between Lebanon and Israel and everything that's happening there, like the tit for tat, it's going to keep growing in size. This is not a good way to de-escalate. I know that much. Fears linger as Lebanon awaits Israeli retaliation for a strike that killed 12 children and teenagers. Our response is coming and it will be severe, Netanyahu said at the scene of the strike. White House warns Israel against escalation after rocket attack. Israel has not listened to any of those warnings in the past. I have zero doubts they will listen to this one either. Aides in Congress create a dissent channel to protest support for Israel. The risk for all-out war between Israel and Lebanon has been ramping up. Turkey's president says his country could enter Israel to help the Palestinians. What is the Golan Heights? Like, that's the summary of this whole article, but that's kind of all you really needed to know. Like, we're going to see a war between Israel and Lebanon, okay? Now, the UN is trying to de-escalate it with their blue helmets. And this is something else you should be aware of. I don't think it's going to work, but the UN is aware of the fact that there's an all-out war on the horizon here. And they're trying to say that there's a way out of it because they know we're on our way into it. And I'm not like talking for Israel. I'm talking for the United States of America. But because they're our ally and because of how we do things, if they go to war directly with them, we will be involved to some degree, no matter how you want to look at it. And right now, we're already spending all of our money in other wars and everything else, including what's going on there in Gaza and everything else. So, like, this is just more depletion for us, right? And this is just what it is. But you still have to be aware of it. And then every time they go into wars and start doing the things that's happening, we, as America, have to raise the risk level because of the enemies that we're creating, right, in the process. I mean, that's just the way it's going right now. That's why we're capturing Palestinian terrorists at the southern border. Like, this is what's happening. It's not something that should be so obscure to consider, but it's just the truth at this point. We are as close as ever to an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah, right? There is a way out. There are about 10,000 UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon deployed since the 2006 war. These blue helmets are ostensibly there to implement Security Resolution 1701, which calls for Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River, about 19 miles from the Israeli border. That resolution, however, was never fully implemented. Hezbollah still operates near the border with Israel, and as a result, over 10,000 Israeli citizens have been displaced from northern Israel in recent months. Israel, for its part, occupies some territories in southern Lebanon, which it is reluctant to cede as long as the threat from Hezbollah persists. Okay, so they already have the security resolution in place. They just have to enact it, and they're saying that if they're allowed to enact it, that this could de-escalate the situation. I don't like the UN. I don't trust the UN, but this is something they're trying to do. To me, this is more evidential that this war between Lebanon and Israel, Hezbollah and Israel, right, is becoming a major concern and is growing, and the capacity for it is going to expand along with it. So that's, to me, what this really tells me, that we're very close to that being a direct conflict between two nations, and that whole Middle East battleground is becoming very big, especially when you think about the fact that Israel is now striking Yemen, and Yemen is removed by an entire other country of Saudi Arabia, right? So, like, this is just growing. It's getting huge. And NATO and our government also thinks it's kind of a big deal because we're telling our citizens to leave. So that's an indication, right? When these things happen and we say, hey, it's time to go, like, it's not because we're thinking there might be something. Like, no, we're pretty sure this is going to be a full-on war, right? And this article is from, I don't know, today, July 29th. So, there's going to be a war in Lebanon between Israel. A number of Western governments are urging their citizens to leave Lebanon as tensions between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah militants escalate. Lebanon is bracing for an Israeli military response to a suspected Hezbollah rocket strike that killed 12 Druze children and young people on a football field in the Golan Heights on Saturday. Israel has said it would retaliate, and civilians are bracing for what officials said could be days of fighting. The United States, Germany, Britain, and France are among the governments issuing travel warnings to their citizens, calling on them to leave Lebanon immediately or avoid travel there as the risk of conflict widens. Rena Bitter, Assistant Secretary for Consular Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, told Americans in Lebanon to create a crisis plan of action and leave before the crisis begins in a video on X, formerly Twitter. We recommend U.S. citizens develop a crisis plan of action and leave before a crisis begins. Regularly scheduled transportation is always the best option while local communications and transportation infrastructure are still intact and operating normally. Now, that is the same exact advice that I would give you here in the United States regarding any type of emergency scenario as well. You have to leave before the crisis, right? If you wait till after, it's too late generally. If you're going to evacuate, you have to evacuate most of the time before the evacuation order is given. or else you get bottlenecked on the highway and you're stuck in traffic and you never actually get to leave, and you find yourself in an even more dangerous situation than you would have been otherwise, right? And sometimes when you wait too long to leave and you still leave anyway, you're actually worse off than if you would have just stayed where you were. So just like they're telling people in Lebanon right now, leave while transportation and critical infrastructure is still up and running. Leave while everything is still operating normally. And that's the best time to leave, right? So if you have an inclination that something bad's going to happen in your area, or maybe wildfires are coming your way, or maybe there's a good chance of severe storms, or maybe a hurricane, or whatever it is, right? Maybe that is a good sign for you to start leaving a little sooner than someone else would have. And that's just how it works. And it's a risk and it's a gamble, and it doesn't always pay off. Sometimes nothing happens and you wasted your gas and your room and board or whatever else it was you expended in order to leave. But sometimes that's still better than what could have happened, right? And so these things are all happening. Like, this is all really recent information. Don't be surprised to find all these things happening in France right now, happening here, especially during our big event, right? Don't forget, the Olympics are the big event right now. The US elections will be the big event in November. And if this is what's happening during France's big event, what will happen during ours? And at the bare minimum, you can see that a couple of arsonists and some guys with some bolt cutters and pliers can shut down the internet and transportation for a huge portion of a country, right? Which, you know, France is like what? Smaller than Texas. So a little bit harder to pull off in the sense of national crisis here in the US, but still a regional crisis could be developed pretty easily with very rudimentary planning and tools, right? So you need to be ready for those things. While we witness these things happen in other places, we should apply that same concept to what we might face here in the future. And I think that's our best tool in the sense of mental preparedness that we have right now, right? We have to learn from what's going on so that we can apply it to our own plans and our own thought process. That's what we do. So, everybody, I think we made it. We're at the hour mark, right? If you want to be in the private live stream tonight, make sure you either hit the join button down below and become a YouTube channel member, and you will have access to the private live stream. If you want to be in the subscribe star, you will also have private access to the live stream. But you also have exclusive content and some preparedness incentives. For example, a subscribe star member just recently received a range bag. This fly. Just received a range bag, which was provided by Midway USA. So that was super cool. And that's something that I do over there as a thank you to those who support directly and want to sign up for all that. But if you want to just be part of the private live streams, the YouTube channel membership is a way to go. And of course, if you can't do either, understandable and also not required. I do not hide relevant information behind a paywall. I will say, if you don't mind, though, hitting the like button, subscribing, or verifying that you are subscribed is a good idea, because sometimes those just go away, apparently. And then also, if you want to, share the video, that would help quite a bit too, because somebody in your inner circle probably needs this information to understand why you're preparing the way that you are. And hopefully the way that I frame all of this information in the context that I presented in gives somebody with a little bit of hesitation some motivation, or at least some understanding as to why it might be a good idea to be a little bit more prepared, right? And that's kind of my goal here. Let's get prepared. We don't have to be weirdos who live underground like hermits and, eat our own self-grown, strange green stuff that might be made of people. But we can at least be reasonable about preparedness and understand that we're just trying to help each other out in case of an emergency. So, Ewok Jerky, thanks for joining. I appreciate it. I hope you can jump in the private live stream. Starts at 9:15 Central Standard Time. If you're a channel member, go to my channel page and then click on the community tab, and then there will be a link there for you to join the private live stream. Everybody else on Subscribestar, you guys know where to go to get that. Anything else you need from me at all, go to magicpepper.com. That's just a website I made one time, and it's still up and running, so there you go. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.